there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today we're going to be giving our hot take review of the game we just finished playing, D.E.I. D.E.I. et Impera.
So before we go on, I just feel like I need to justify something here because this is my game pick. And I think one of the first things anybody that's playing this game needs to know is that if you're completely confused about how this name is pronounced, you are not alone. Because I saw, D.E.I. and then who knows what the rest of it is. I actually looked it up because I wanted to make sure we were pronouncing it right. And I saw like 5 different videos with 5 different pronunciations. This is Latin, so it might be divide at Impera, which is what I saw in most of the board game sites. But when I actually looked at pronouncing Latin sites, they said things like D.E.I. at Impera. Or even one actually had it pronounced like a W, like D.E.I. at Impera. So anyway, the point being, this probably is the one situation where it actually helps to have that weird hyphenated name, like the D.E.I., D.E.I. at Impera, because you can just ignore the second half and say D.E.I. So that's what I plan to do.
Yeah, and it is actually really strange that there's a name and they literally titled it, like pre-titled it with just the initials of the name that's right after it. That's a really weird title choice.
It is a little bit strange. It's a little bit like GP, Gaia Project.
Yeah, but Gaia Project doesn't put GP on oh yeah, that's what you were saying. Yeah, got it right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But here they have a nice, like their logo. They even have a DEI logo that's all like fancy and cool. Like they paid money to have an artist make this cool looking DEI initials in there.
I know. Right. Hey, but after this, maybe we play a game of Agricola. Anyway, enough about that. I'll get off my soapbox.
All right. Well, before we jump into the game today, usually we have a poll that we discuss, but I don't have a poll today. Instead, I just wanted to mention that this episode is our 200th weekly episode that we've released. In fact, it's officially our 201st because our first episode that we released in our podcast feed is episode 0, but this is titled episode 200. So congrats guys. And how are you feeling? How many more episodes do you have in you?
I can go probably another 5 or 6 more, then I'm out. No, I'm having fun doing this. We've done some modifications, made it a little more streamlined. So it's fun and I'm enthusiastic about it. And I enjoy being here, hanging out with you guys, playing new games, playing different games all the time. Not necessarily new, but new to me games at least. And I enjoy sitting around talking about them. So as long as I have the time and you guys are available, I don't know, keep going until my 70s.
Yeah, and I forgot to tell you guys, but this is my last episode, so I quit. No, just kidding. I feel a lot the same as Adam does. It's going great. I'm having so much of a good time. It's funny because when we started doing this, even before that, I remember hearing stories or reading articles about people doing content online for things like YouTube and podcasts and whatnot. There was always this kind of dynamic where if you want to have an audience, you have to keep up your production. You have to make sure that you keep putting things out or else people are going to fall off, your listeners, your viewers or whatever. And I always thought to myself, wow, what a mess. Who would ever want to do that? And then here we are doing that 200 episodes later. We still haven't missed a week and still having a great time doing it and not feeling like, we're strangling ourselves trying to get the stuff done. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that we've got 3 people that are really willing to step up and, share the work on this. And I think that's pretty great. I love it.
Yeah, we did a couple changes to our format like a year ago to just streamline a little bit. One of it was to not do a gameplay we were doing 3 out of 4 was like a full gameplay session. And that's like a 4 or 5 hour evening once a week. And then you add in the, several hours of editing and stuff like that. So it was quite a bit. So now that we're just doing gameplays a couple times a month, sometimes even less than that, it's fun when we get to do it because we're getting to get on and play together, but it's not the overload of every week. So that's been really cool. Editing's been really fun. I got into that this last year to help you guys out, and I'm actually having fun with it. I kind of miss it when it's not my turn. I'm not saying I'm going to take it every week, but once in a while I'll be like, man, I kind of wish I could edit that one. There's a couple of things I want to do post.
Tim, after Chris is smiling, I'm smiling. Tim's seeing the advantage of editing. We all joke that whoever edits that week sounds the best on the episode. And it's kind of, we know exactly what we want to say. Oh, I don't want to hear that. I'm going to take out that dumb thing I just said. So you have the advantage of being able to control what gets out there. It's kind of nice.
Tim won this week. I'm going to make sure he sounds really bad.
Yeah. Well, right on, guys. So anyway, I've been having a great time with it too, and I look forward to many more episodes. If you enjoy the show, we love to interact with our listeners. So this is a great time to just say 200 episodes in. If you want to support us, find us on patreon.com/boardgamehottakes, and please support us at any level there. There's a variety of things we're giving to people. We've got some special content, a very big piece of special content that's only going to be available to Patreon coming up in the next week or two. But we've got some fun videos from our last con out there, and we also let you vote on the topics that we're going to be recording on and the games we're going to be playing. So 200 episodes. We put all these hours in. Come out and support us on Patreon. Otherwise, join us on Blue Sky and join us on our Facebook group. We do just like having conversations with our listeners, have a lot of great chatter that's going on out there. So thanks for joining us for 200 episodes. Hopefully there's many more to come. With that said, let's jump into D.E.I at Impera.
In D.E.I, D.E.I at Impera were 49 years after the global climate disaster that turned the world into a frozen wasteland. In England, the technologically and militarily advanced purebreds now rule over the desperate survivors, struggling day to day to avoid freezing or starving. And us? Well, we're those struggling survivors. Each player leads a faction of scavengers whose only hope of survival is to comb the ruins of London to gather technology and power sources, in the hope that the purebreds will reward your ingenuity with life-saving supplies. The game takes place over the course of 4 rounds, each of which is divided into 3 action phases. During each action phase, players will play 2 cards. These can either be played face up, which allows the player to take the actions on the cards, or they can be played face down, which allows the player to purchase cards from the technology market. The purchased technology cards are then added to the player's hand and provide more powerful actions than the player's base deck. Cards played for their face value allow scavengers to take actions like moving, collecting salvage technology, building bridges and outposts, and recruiting new scrappers. Also, at various points during these 3 action phases, players will have the opportunity to unlock feats, which provide some permanent action upgrades or fulfill missions. Now, this is where the scavengers carry out tasks assigned by the purebred overlords and will also account for the majority of the endgame points. All of this action takes place on a central board that represents a snow-covered overview of a ruined London. This is where players deploy and move their scavengers, discover and collect tech, and generally bully and outwit the members of the other factions. After 4 rounds, players will tally their scores, which are measured in supplies, and the player with the most supplies is crowned the Alpha Scavenger. D.E.I. D.E.I at Impera was designed by Tommaso Battista and is published by Ludus Magnus Studios.
All right, thanks for that description, Chris. So we're going to jump right into the gameplay and mechanisms, and this was our first play for all 3 of us tonight. I think, I'll just start by saying I think the one thing that really drove a little bit of fun for me in this game was the missions. They were called, they're these end game goals, and I just, I like it when there's just a shift, and I think they're going to be different missions every game you play. So you just have this opportunity to just pursue some specific goals, some that you're kind of fighting with the other people over. That combined with the missions to kind of complete your, I forget again what Chris just called it, but if you have 2 outposts of a certain color done by the second phase of each round, then you get to flip one of your goals. So just having those little tactical things to drive my decisions every round and kind of push me to play different things. I don't know. I thought it was fun. It was fun to go after those little goals. And I did really well at it too, which probably didn't hurt.
Yeah, the feats are what you're talking about.
Yeah.
For having control of 2 of the outpost cubes, you get to flip your feet, which gives you an extra advantage or some sort of bonus. One of mine was made my bridges help for area majority thing. So I got one of those feats accomplished during the game. So that felt good. I did not get, I think Tim got all 3 of his, so he was crushing it. And yeah, and then those end of round goals, sort of something like Gaia Project or I don't know, Barrage. So you have these things to work towards at the end of the round. And then if you accomplish them right away, if you accomplish them on time, you got sort of more points for meeting the criteria. And you could also, if you're in round 3, you could go back and accomplish the one from round 1 and get not as many points for them, but you could still go back and kind of do the previous ones. So a little bit of, I don't know, something interesting to think about there with those loosely end of round goals. I thought those were kind of neat too, Tim.
Yeah, those were pretty cool. I think it's worth kind of taking a step back and talking about sort of the overall feel of the game and kind of what the general gist of what you're doing on a turn is. This game was designed by Tommaso Battista, who was one of the co-designers along with Simone Luciani of Barrage, which is it's one of my favorite games. I'm pretty sure it's one of Adam's favorite games, and it's a game that Tim will generally tolerate if he's in good company. And so I spent a lot of time looking for sort of stylistic cues from Barrage, and I will say I found absolutely none of them. What I did find was a lot of stylistic cues back to El Grande, and I think that actually you guys had made similar comments throughout the game, that it felt a lot like that. It felt like so much of the game you spent kind of dumping guys out onto the board and moving them around so that you could gain control of a certain spot. Because majority or superiority, which were two terms of art in the game that I'm not entirely sure why the difference matters, but it did apparently, is that you can't move into a space if you don't have a majority. You can't collect resources in a space if you don't have majority. You can't achieve some of these goals if you don't control the outposts in a particular region, and those require a majority. So all this stuff requires majority. Majority is huge. And so you're just constantly moving around or dumping people out on the board with their enlist action, trying to get majority in these different areas, to the point where by the end of the game, Adam and I were kind of dueling over these two spots to get these two outposts. And I think we had put our entire bench of scavengers out there in these two spots, which is probably the reason why Tim won, because he was out there spreading around, taking up all these other spaces. And Adam and I were kind of foolishly battling over these two little spots just to get these cubes. But that's just how important area majority felt. And it mattered for almost everything you had to do in this game.
Tim won because of his superior strategic brain. But
that's true.
The thing is too, I agree, Chris, that that's kind of the core of what you're doing, is just where can you put the most troops and hold it. And I think the problem beyond that is just that the way you did it wasn't very interesting here. It was one of these, kind of card action selection games where you have a handful of cards at the end of the round. You pick up all the cards you've used already. But there was really 3 icons on almost all the cards. There's a couple others that you could buy, but mostly it's like move, deploy troops, and pick up resources. And so it wasn't very exciting actions that you're taking. And you get to take 2 cards, play 2 cards on a turn, and there's 3 turns within a round. And so you're going to get to play 6 of those, or some of them you're going to, basically give up the card to buy another card. So you might not even get 6 of them, but none of the actions were very interesting to play. So like there really wasn't anything clever about the mechanisms or the mechanical play of the game. It definitely fell flat from that perspective for me.
The one other action on some of these cards, they had a little picture of a drone. There's these 3 little drones out there on the board, and they all had kind of a different little special power. So the one Tim and I kept using was this little flying saucer looking guy. You'd move that guy pretty easily around to these different regions on the board, and you get to deploy 2 guys right away. So it's sort of an additional action as well. But, the drone gives you some little, so the other one of the other ones, you can move and collect some stuff. And then the other one, I'd let you do something else, maybe build something. I forget what the other one, we never even used the third one, which maybe we should have done. Maybe that would help.
Yeah, I think it had something to do with like, if you move it to a space where you have troops, then you can kind of push troops out.
Yeah, that's right.
And then they don't have to worry about elevation and things like that.
And it's not for sure you'll even get one of these drone cards. You had to buy, I don't know if Tim's deck came with one, but for me, I had to.
Yeah.
Okay, so I didn't have a drone card in my initial deck. I had to buy one. That's another mechanism in this game. You have the card market there, and if you collect enough resources, you could trade some of those in to buy cards with restrictions. Some of them you had to have some of these outpost cubes on your little player board in order to buy from. There was always a black market where if you had enough resources, you could just pay for those. But yeah, Tim, the actions on the cards, those 3 actions weren't necessarily super fun to do, right? And the choice wasn't that great. So the little system of resources for cards, for doing actions, it was okay, but nothing spectacular.
Yeah, even the cards that you could buy generally didn't feel that spectacular. I mean, because your cards didn't feel that exciting, but they're base deck cards, right? They're not supposed to feel exciting. But even the ones that you could buy didn't feel like they added a ton. Like they may add a 3rd enlist action or a 3rd scavenge action instead of 2, that kind of a thing. But on the other hand, they felt punishingly expensive. I mean, in each of the card markets, there was 3 card markets, a red, a green, and a blue, which matched the 3 colored outposts. And what cards you could buy were determined by what outposts you controlled. So if you controlled 2 blue outposts, you could buy any of the blue cards. If you controlled 1 blue outpost, then you could buy 2 of them. And if you didn't control any, you could still buy 1 of them. But so there's another area where that majority in the area majority was really important. So they gave you more card market options, but all of them just felt so expensive that I think I did it like twice. And each time I felt like I was just scraping, the bottom of my barrel, taking the last penny out of my purse to try to like buy these cards. And it didn't feel that worth it.
Yeah, part of the cost of buying these cards is you had to discard, you forego an action to buy one of these cards. That was also part of the cost. You give up an action and then you pay the resources. 2 circles is worth a point and a triangle is worth a point. And the cards cost anywhere from 1 circle to a couple triangles. So you're giving up, anywhere from a half a point to 2.5 points on some of these cards. They give you some points back, anywhere from 1 to 4 points back on most of these cards. But yeah, it was a little punishing to buy these cards, Chris. You're right.
One last thing I wanted to mention, a lot of the actions you have to take is just to move around, which is definitely not a favorite part of gameplay for me. But this one was particularly restrictive because you had different levels of elevation in the game. And I wonder how much they did that just to make the production worthwhile and we'll talk about this in production, but if you look at the actual physical production of this board, there's literally like levels of cardboard to show the different levels of the buildings you have to move around. But it got really tricky. You were kind of blocked out from areas until you built an elevator next to one, or if you used a special ability or like a drone or something to get you up over it. So it just made the normal kind of area control adjacency movement even more difficult, which was frustrating at times. But it gave some purpose to some of the cards and abilities, I guess, that the game had to offer. Yeah, that's about all I have to say, I think, on mechanisms, other than I did appreciate that the game went fairly quick. Well, I'll say that it should have gone fairly quick if Chris didn't have to keep redoing his turns over and over again. But the game, I think, is going to play fairly quickly. It was not long rounds. This is probably an hour game when everybody's in and moving it. And so I appreciated that it didn't outstay its welcome any more than that hour. So I think that's a good time to lead us into the conversation on the production and presentation and artwork of D.E.I.
Yeah, the production here, like you said, Tim, looking at the physical copy, it's bright, it's vibrant. There's little miniatures. You have your little supply of scavengers. I think each person has like 9, or I forget how many scavengers, maybe is it 12? Anyway, a handful of scavengers and a leader, just these little pint-sized guys. And then you have the cards that they're not full-size playing cards. They're little miniature cards that have your actions on them. So a nice, bright, vibrant production, but also kind of strange. So you have to build the board. It's modular. So you have to get these like 9 chunks or so of square tiles that you're piecing those together, like a giant tic-tac-toe board, putting those, and that'll generate this sort of landscape of, like Tim was talking about, these different elevations. And then so looking at that, it's probably a lot easier to see in the physical production because you can actually see the different elevations. Maybe I don't think all the versions of the game come with those elevations. So it's a little bit difficult to distinguish. You have this ground floor level and this first floor level and then a second floor level. So you're kind of like, can I move here? Nope. Oh, here's a little tiny elevator here. It was a little bit tough to distinguish different elements on the board and where I could move exactly. And oh, shoot, there's this little thing I didn't see here. So the board itself didn't stand out to me as being super beautiful to look at like a lot of these other boards are.
Well, I want to disagree on that because I think it's a really unique layout for a board. It feels like snow-covered buildings with areas in between them. I actually think that's one of the cooler things about the presentation, even if it's a little frustrating from a usability perspective. I thought it gave it kind of a cool. It added to the theme, I felt, in a good way.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Tim on that. I think that the production, including the board, is actually quite nice. In fact, one of the reasons why I was interested in playing this game tonight is that this game came out on Kickstarter in a campaign several years ago. I would say several. I don't remember how many years it was, but it was more than 2 years. And I remember seeing it and having some interest in it because it looked so nice. And I was at a phase in my board gaming career then when I really was more attracted to a fine production than I was to actual gameplay. And so it really did look exciting to me. But eventually that Kickstarter got withdrawn. They pulled the Kickstarter. I don't remember why, but they stopped it and then they reinserted it. I think it was maybe 2 years ago. And now the game is in production. It's out. You can buy it from the Ludus Magnus website. And so a lot of what drew me to this game was the physical production of it. And it looks great. I mean, that multi-layer board is really cool. There's all these minis. The minis are really nicely done. It's very post-apocalyptic looking. The characters are kind of unique and interesting. And it has a nice production. It looks like it would have a really nice table presence if you were playing this live. I mean, we played it on BGA, which also looked nice. But I think this game would shine if you were playing it on a table, able to move your guys up and down these buildings and whatnot. And I think that'd be pretty neat.
Yeah, an exceptional production, but I think over the top. And I think, to be honest, everything about this production it's going to make the game way more expensive than it deserves to be for what is a fairly light, simple game. It's going to make the setup a lot longer than it needs to be for what is a fairly light, simple game. And so I think this is a case where overproduction is a problem. Even though it turned out really nice, I just don't think a game of this weight warrants this much excess. That said, I did want to call out, I think that the theme in this is neat. It's cool that they put a cool theme on here, that they kind of told a unique story. And I think the artwork on the cards really represents it. As I mentioned, the board really represents it. So it's a really cool production. It's a beautiful production. I just don't think that the game really justifies it.
Yeah, I'll buy that, Tim. I want to touch on the artwork. Like you said, it's pretty neat artwork. It's very stylistic. It has these characters that all sort of generate this sort of emotion, this evocative response. They're all very stylized and looking cool. The background, a little bit of a Scythe feel almost. Some giant mechs walking around, the drones, giant mechs walking around in the background. But you're totally right. It's for this weight of game. You have all this chunky stuff and all this setup that's going to be required. Oof. It doesn't need to be that produced.
Yeah, I'm actually looking right now at the production copy that you can buy on the Ludus Magnus website. And I got to say, it's a little bit of a letdown compared to the Kickstarter version. Like you have these meeples instead of these big, cool minis. And it looks like you still have that multi-layer board, but it looks like they definitely cut a few things out in the standard production version. In fact, you don't have minis for the drones. You don't have minis for the characters, which to me, that would make a huge difference. I mean, part of what makes this game fun looking is that it does have such a nice production. Now, I will say, regardless of the production, it does have a cool story behind it. I like the idea of, the post-apocalyptic. I mean, kind of anything post-apocalyptic is kind of fun for me. And this one, it's the snow-covered waste, which, we've seen a couple other times in other games like Revive. And so I like that they did that here. One thing, though, that I find myself scratching my head about, and this happens frequently with me in the stories behind games, that if you look at the story in the rule book, it talks about we're 50 years after this climate crisis, and there's the purebreds and this and that and the other thing. But then there's also this kind of sub-story about the purebreds are trying to divide and rule us, which I guess is where they get the name D.E.I. And that there is the Ravagers, which are one of the factions, are kind of trying to lead the others together to overthrow the purebreds. Yet that never shows its face in any way in the game, in any form or fashion. I mean, the entire game is about fulfilling these missions that the purebreds give you so that you get their supplies. I mean, maybe if they had thrown in some kind of a campaign mode that involved some sort of trying to overthrow the purebreds or, I don't know, something, then it might have made it even more interesting. But as it was, I thought it was a pretty interesting story behind the game, with this piece about the purebreds kind of thrown in there like an appendage.
It sounds like what you really wanted was a one versus many game, Chris.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah, great point about the purebreds and this overlord character that was in the rule book. That was kind of a weird twist to the whole thing, and I don't know why that was in there, but I don't know. Somebody had some story to write and story they wanted to tell, so it ended up in there.
All right, well, let's jump into our final question and ask, would you request to play this game again? And I'll start this week. I don't think so. I was okay. If somebody else had it set up on the table and we had an hour to kill, I wouldn't mind playing it, especially the physical version. It's a cool production, but there's a couple things about this type of game that turn me off. One, I don't like that kind of hand management action selection mechanism. It exists in a lot of games and I almost never enjoy it. And this one, it was even on the duller side just because of the simplicity of the types of actions you could get on those cards. And then just this, moving troops around until you've got a majority in a section and trying to just get more troops than everybody else in the section, moving, placing troops, moving, placing troops, moving, placing troops. it's kind of dull. So not my favorite styles of play, but I think the production does elevate it a little bit. And I think for that reason, it might be fun to have on the table at some point.
Yeah, my thoughts pretty much echo yours, Tim. If this was somebody's favorite game they really, really wanted to play, I'd play it with them, sure. But I'm not going to go looking to play this one. I'm not going to ask anybody to play this one. Yeah, it has that El Grande feel. Like Chris and I were just putting our guys out in this region. And for me, I didn't really get much out of it other than a last place finish. And I didn't feel like there was too many clever things to do in this game. I'm sure there is on repeat plays. You're going to be able to use those feats to combo up, to do some sneaky stuff, put some bridges out and get some more majority without anybody realizing, or do some clever things here and there. But it's brisk, so that's nice. But yeah, nothing spectacular here for me. I'm not going to be thinking about this one too much, I don't think, over the next coming weeks.
Yep, I'm with you guys. I would play this game. I wouldn't object to it. I might even play another game on BGA just to explore it a little bit and see if, this makes for a future wrong take or something like that. But I just did not love this game. And I'll draw a couple of comparisons. Like El Grande, I don't love the dumping characters in there, trying to get area majority. And like you guys both said it, so I won't say it again, that part about just kind of swapping area majority back and forth, that gets really old really fast. But El Grande has a really boring theme too. So I like this one better than El Grande. But I think it was Tim, you had also mentioned as we were playing it, that's a lot like Tyrants of the Underdark as well. But Tyrants of the Underdark has a really entertaining deck building aspect to it, which this game did not have. And I think that gets to your point about it being sort of a dull mechanism of, the hand management, which was okay, but it just really left me kind of flat, not that exciting. And so I think overall, I just felt so flat so many times. And this game committed, I think, is probably the cardinal sin of board gaming. In the last round, I decided, and I think kind of correctly, that the best thing for me to do for my endgame scoring was going to be to maintain my control of 2 red outposts. And so those are the ones that Adam and I had been battling. Finally, he gave up, I think, and moved on to something else. And I felt like I needed to hang on to those because that's where endgame points sat. So what that meant for me was that of the 12 turns that I got in this game, 2 of them, I ended up essentially doing nothing because standing fast in those last 2 turns were what allowed me to keep control of those 2 areas. I didn't have anything else that I could collect. I didn't want to move because then I would have had to move my characters and lose area majority potentially. I couldn't enlist because all my guys were already out on the board. So I basically just passed twice, and not like a strategic pass, like passing gets you some benefit. Just passing because doing anything there would have been disadvantageous to me. I mean, that felt so depressing, kind of achieving the goal I was trying to achieve 2 turns before the end of the game and throwing away almost a quarter of my game. And like I said, in the end, that actually got me a lot of points. I didn't win the game, but at least in our sad little first timers game where I doubt any of us played particularly well, it was the right thing to do. And that's just not what you want to do in a board game. So I found it a little bit depressing.
The official board game hot take stance is that El Grande is a better game than this and also a party game. Just kidding. All right. Well, I think that will wrap up our conversation on D.E.I. and we'll talk about some games that have been on our table right after this. Welcome back. So this week on my table, I've had another Uwe Rosenberg game. He's been hitting hard for me lately. And this week I got to play Hallertau. This is a game that was published in 2020 and is a meaty Euro. It's about farming, just right up Uwe Rosenberg's, kind of that's his lane. And this does it really well. I thought it was a very fun game. It is a worker placement game. Your workers are cubes. And you guys should take a look at the main player board here, because this is the thing that's kind of always turned me off of the game. It looks like a kind of a spreadsheet. Basically, there's 20 action spaces out on this main board, and each of them has space for 6 cubes. The top row holds 1 cube, the second row holds 2, and the bottom holds 3, or something like that.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
Hey, real quickly, when you say kind of like a spreadsheet, do you mean exactly like a spreadsheet? Like it actually is a spreadsheet with graphs behind it?
It looks like it, right? But really what it is, this is more like a Feast for Odin, and that, in a Feast for Odin, you've got the 4 action columns, and in many of the columns, the first action, it costs 1 worker. The second action might cost 2 workers. And so sometimes you want to be the one to take the first action. The difference, though, is that in a Feast for Odin, sometimes those columns are different, and the actions you get are more powerful the more workers you place there. That's not the case here. But it actually makes a really clever use of this. The way it works is that at the start of the game, we played a 2-player game. And at the start of the game, you basically fill in the single cube action space on every one of those spaces on the board. So theoretically, everyone's going to have to pay 2 cubes. But at the start of the round, you flip over a card and it tells you which regions of the 4 regions on the board that you remove those extra cubes. And so now you've got an action economy that's varied every game. In our game, there happened to be 2 regions where some of the actions were cheaper and 2 regions where they were more expensive. Then you play out your turn, and we both played 6 cubes out there. So there ends up being another 12 cubes out there. In some of the action spaces, there might be 2 cubes already there. So it would cost you 3, etc. And then at the start of the next round, you again flip a card and remove cubes from some regions. So one of the regions might go down to 0 cubes. Everything's going to be cheap there. One of them might not get touched at all, and you still have like 2 or 3 cubes in every space. So I found it really fun from a worker placement perspective that you weren't just fully resetting at the end of the round. You had some actions that just were not going to be as valuable. You were going to have to spend more of your cubes to use them. I thought that was really clever. Now, the gist of what you're doing in this game is you are growing crops. So think of the crop growing part of Agricola, where you have plots of land out on your player board, and then you're going to get these crops and plant them. But there are some other cool things that it does. For example, you can have your plots at space 2 through 5 on your player board. And so they will move up and down based on, if you fertilize, it's going to move up and become a more valuable plot. But at the end of the round, when you sow or when you reap your plants, you're going to get the number of plants based on where that is. So you could get anywhere between 2 and 5 plants from the one type of crop that's planted there. There are 4 different crop resources, but then there's also like 4 different resources related to sheep, like meat and wool and stuff like that. So aside from the crops, there's also this sheep mechanism where you can get sheep, and then at the end of the round, they produce milk, and you can take actions that will turn your sheep into other stuff. That's all fine, right? And it feels like a typical, worker placement with farming thing. But here's where the real fun of the game comes in, is that this game is heavily card driven. At the start of the game, you all start with 5 unique cards randomly given to you off the top of decks. And what these are little mini goals. They have all kinds of thresholds on them. And then when you fulfill one of the thresholds, let's say it says you need 4, flax. And so you just fill this at any time. You just basically reveal it. Hey, I filled this. I get 1 little bonus, but I also get another card off this other deck. And then some of the decks might be ones that if you fulfill the conditions and turn in resources, you get this ongoing income. So anyway, it was just this constant flow of fun little goals that I was trying to build, take the right actions, beat my opponent to the action so that I was getting the cheapest ones. And then at the end of the round, there's this whole thing where you can turn in resources to kind of basically elevate your farm, get you more workers in the next round, and eventually that turns into points. This is a really clever game. I thought it worked really well. I had a great time playing it. I can't wait to play it again. I think this was another hit from Uwe Rosenberg and a really strong game in his portfolio.
Tim, would I enjoy this game?
I don't know, Adam. I would have to say no, because you don't like Agricola. You don't like a Feast for Odin. These are just, this is a multiplayer solitaire game very much, other than the worker placement blocking in it. So I don't think that you'd like it. On the other hand, I do think that Chris would really like it, because he likes both of those games. And even though it didn't exactly feel like them, you can feel the kind of, it's a similar type of Yuri presence that those games have. So no, I don't think you should play it.
All right. I've heard there's one interesting mechanism where your whole farm is shifting.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Yeah, that's what I was explaining at the end of the round. You're trying to basically, you have 5 little craft houses that sit next to your farm. And each of them has a different resource, or a couple different resources you have to pay. And at the end of the first round, you can pay 1 resource to move your little house over 1 space. And if you can move all the houses over 1 space, the craft house, that's when you get to move your whole farm over. And then in one of the windows on your farm, it reveals how many workers you're going to get the next round. So you're going to get to elevate it. But it gets really interesting, because in the second round, you have to pay 2 resources. And the third round, 3 resources, and so on. So the earlier that you can move this, and you can move those craft houses as many times as you want, but there's another mechanism of these stones that kind of get behind it. So you can move it one space for free, but then after that you have to use these tools, which are a rare thing to get, to move the rocks out of the way. But if you can manage to get enough tools to move rocks and pay for the craft houses, the earlier in the game you do it, the better you're going to be. It was a fun puzzle to play around with, along with all those little card, the card thresholds you're trying to meet.
What player interaction is there in this game? I think maybe the action economy, so it's going to get a little more expensive for later actions.
It's a worker placement. That's the interaction you're doing essentially. You can be the one that's like, okay, there's 2 more spaces on the board that only cost 1 worker. I can see that Adam needs that one. He's going to want to take that action, so I'm going to go in there and use it. So it's like action. Mainly you're taking the actions that are going to benefit you the best. But it was an interesting economy because it's not just about what the other players are doing this round, but it could be what's left over from the last round that didn't get moved down, and like where that region didn't get reduced in the number of cubes in there. So I think it's going to just drive really different strategies every game, depending on the cards you get, as well as that economy. I thought it was a really clever way to do worker placement. We kind of had this conversation on our Facebook group with somebody talking about multiplayer solitaire, and where this is not exactly multiplayer solitaire because what you do may impact other people, but you're not probably choosing to do it to impact them.
Okay.
Mainly, you're just, I've got to take my action, and all of a sudden it's more expensive for the other person.
Yeah, this game looks, just by looking at it, looks horrible. I mean, this is but then again, that's kind of what I say about all these Uwe Rosenberg games, and I've been wrong every single time. So I think what I've learned, the lesson that I've taken from all those experiences, is don't bet against Uwe Rosenberg. So I would love to try this game. It sounds I won't say it sounds fun, but I bet it's really fun.
Yeah, I think you like it, Chris. It's exactly the type of Euro that you will just get into. You'll be heads down going like, oh, like you're just getting these great little goals. And in some weird ways, it reminded me a little bit of Tapestry, along with an Uwe Rosenberg game, because you've got these card goals, and it's just every time you kind of got little objectives you're going to. The way you play the game doesn't change, but those cards are going to make you make different choices than you would normally make. So yeah, I think you dig it.
And you played this one at 2, you said. What do you think? How would it play at 3 or 4?
I think it played great at all those player counts, except it's just going to add some downtime. Okay. The action economy is where the interaction comes from, and the game does that for you by taking less cubes off at the beginning of the next round. So you just end up leaving more cubes on. So, it won't be quite as dynamic of an economy with 2 players, but we definitely felt it. And I don't think it would drastically change. I think this was a great game to play at 2 players, but I would be fine at 3 or 4 as well.
Okay. Well, I have had nothing on my table, but looking ahead, there's an interesting pairing between Richard Garfield, who did one of Tim's favorite games, Magic the Gathering, and I think he was involved in Android Netrunner, and a publishing company I rip on a lot for their bland productions and a lot of war games, GMT Games. They are getting together to make a game, sort of a sci-fi game, so that's why I'm interested, of course, called Founders of Reyvick. And in this game, you're competing to create the most valuable company on a planet where everything is for sale. So that's the tagline right from Board Game Geek. No credit to me for that. I just thought this was an interesting blend. I don't know any other games that Richard Garfield has designed. It isn't just sort of a quick little card game or some little clever kind of card game. So it'll be interesting to see what he does when he's trying to make a bigger box type of a game with an economy. I'm going to keep my eyes on this one. I don't know if I'm going to buy it, but also another thing you don't hear me say often about GMT games, the artwork in this looks pretty darn fantastic. Aside from the font, which looks like cheesy and from 1979 computers. I don't know. I'm interested. I'm going to keep my eye on this one. Have either of you guys heard of this one? Are you guys interested at all? What do you guys think of Richard Garfield hooking up with GMT games?
First of all, a rare future take. We haven't done one of those for a long time. So Adam, thanks for bringing something interesting back. Because Richard Garfield's name on it, I'm interested. And I had seen this, something posted about this recently. I think there was a Board Game Geek News article about it. And so, yeah, Richard Garfield has done a lot of great games. Everything he's ever made that I've played, I've enjoyed. Sometimes they're lighter than I want to play, but they're always at least pretty fun. I read that this is a little bit of there's a decent economy here, but it sounded like an interesting use of economy. But like it looks like a GMT game. So the artwork on some of the cards is fine, but look at the cover on this box. This box was made in 1962 as like a sci-fi paperback. What is GMT doing? Like why would they do that to a Richard Garfield game, who is usually, his games are light, bright, colorful, cool productions, and it feels like a weird mix. But I'm definitely very interested in playing it more than most GMT games because of his involvement. And it kind of sounds like a fun game. There's a main board here that has, and I know there's still potentially subject to change. Like this isn't a finished product, but the main economy board again looks outdated, but has a cool layout on it. Like there's some interesting things going on with the layout of the economy out in the middle of this main board.
So Tim, I got to take serious objection to at least one point you made there. I don't think that any 1960s sci-fi publisher would have put that kind of picture on their novel, on their paperback. Nobody would have stooped quite that low. No, it's an absolutely atrocious looking box. I can't believe that someone would actually do that in this modern day and age. So, having no emotional connection to either Richard Garfield or GMT, nothing about this makes me say, woohoo, let's play it. But I'll be happy to hear a report back from Adam on whether this is a game worth trying or not. And I will trust your judgment.
So there's not that many pictures on Board Game Geek right now. The place I'm finding most little sneak peeks is the GMT website itself. You can see a few pictures of the cards, which are great. That Planet board that you guys were talking about, it looks so cheesy and retro, but it kind of has a little bit of charm to it, I'm going to say. That's disputable for sure. But take a look, see what you guys think. It's different from GMT. So that's a note of interest. I'm going to keep my eye on Founders of Reyvick.
Was this part of their 500s, like P500? So did this one get published then? This is available? It will definitely be.
This is not available yet. This is it's on their P500. You can, it's like the GMT version of Kickstarter, if you haven't heard what this is. So they take pre-orders. Usually when it gets to about 500, that's why they call it the P500, is when they'll get going with the production and finalization of rules, and they'll start working on it because they're going to wait till they have enough orders to make it worth their while to produce this thing.
Okay, this is the first time I've been on their website on one of these P500 things, and so it shows you how many orders they have to date. They have 339 orders. Okay, you're doing something wrong when Richard Garfield, one of the greatest game designers ever, puts out a game that sounds interesting and you don't get more than 339 orders at this point. I'm sure it'll get there, but I bet this would be like Richard Garfield, go work with Stonemaier Games. You got an easy 30,000 copies pre-sold the day that it gets announced. So, I mean, come on.
Isn't this a strange marriage? It's such a strange marriage. Like, I don't know why it's happening.
Yeah, just look at the box, Tim. There's your answer right there.
Yeah, you're right.
All right. So on my table this week has been a game that was one of the ones that made my list of games I want to play in 2024. It was Kanban EV, designed by Vital Lacerda and published by Eagle Griffin Games. After we put that episode out, my friend Eric that I play games with said, hey, I got a copy of it. If you ever want to play it, let's play it. So over Memorial Day weekend, I happened to be over at his house for a game afternoon. This happens to be the same game afternoon when I played that delightful family one, Rush Out, that I mentioned to you guys last time.
Yeah.
After we played Rush Out with the kids, he and I sat down to play the grown-up game, which was Kanban EV. This is a dense sucker of a game. There is a lot of stuff happening in this, which fans of Vital Lacerda should not be surprised by. It is a huge board with a ton of stuff going on. I won't get into a lot of detail because I could literally spend an hour going through the mechanisms of this game. In fact, I think the teach that Eric gave me of this probably took pretty close to an hour before we actually got the game going. Add in the setup, and it probably took like an hour and a half. But you have essentially a car production plant, electric vehicles, and down the center of the board, you've got this, it's like a hallway down the center of this plant. And there are stations along the way, which are basically the doors that you go into to go to this department or that department. There's the admin department. There's the production department, the R&D department. They're all accessed through this central hallway. And then within each of those doors, there's a million little things you can do. You can build cars, you can research, you can all kinds of stuff. So what I do want to talk about, other than just the density of this game, is the super interesting action selection mechanism, which I thought was terrific and is probably going to make it into my list of interesting action mechanisms if we ever end up doing another one of those episodes. The simple version of it is that you go down this hallway and there's all these doors, and the people get to pick which door they want to go to. And then once you're at that door, then starting at the top and moving down toward the bottom of the board, you take those actions in order. But kind of the spoiler here, and the thing that really makes this unique, is that you have the supervisor, who normally lives down in the admin department, starts at the top of the board, and then each round moves down one step. And you can't go to the department where the supervisor is. And one of the actions you can take in any of the departments is training. Training allows you to take better actions. It allows you to have more benefits. And when the supervisor gets to that department, whoever has the lower level of training gets some kind of a truly punishing detriment. They get slammed pretty hard. So you always want to make sure that when the supervisor gets to that department, that you have more training than your opponent does. And so you're always trying to stay one step ahead of that and get all the things you need to get done, like doing your research and doing your car production and all that. But at the same time, trying to make sure that you're not falling behind in your training, because if you do, the supervisor is going to get there and you're going to get slammed. So what that created was this really interesting situation where, based on the position of the supervisor and the position of the two players or three players or four players, however many you have, you can have this weird circumstance where you've got one player takes their turn and gets to do various things. And then because the next figure down the board is the supervisor, then the supervisor steps in and does some pretty big stuff that the supervisor does. And then the next player goes. So, and then, or you can have it so that the supervisor goes first and then the players go next. Or you can have it that, the other way around, so that the players all go and then the supervisor goes. So it can really kind of throw you where the supervisor fits into the player order based on where you are in that hallway. So it was super neat. It probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense hearing that without seeing a board in front of you or having played the game, but it was unique. It was interesting. It was highly strategic. We figured that out after a couple of rounds, just how important it was to sequence it so that the supervisor fell into the sequence where it was most advantageous for you. And it was deeply impactful on the game. So this is one that I'm looking forward to trying again. The downside of this game is that it has so many little micro rules that by the end of the game, I imagine we probably, unwittingly violated 75 different little rules that we forgot to do this or forgot to do that. Kind of like what we've said before about Arc Novo, where you can forget to do a million things in the course of just one turn. We probably did that here. So this feels like a game that you want to play with at least one person at the table who knows the game pretty well. So interested to try this one again. Glad I had it on my list. Glad I got a chance to play it.
Chris, does this make you want to play another Vital Lacerda game or try any others, or do you feel like one's enough?
I think I'd like to try more. I don't think Lacerda is going to end up being my favorite designer, but there was a lot of interesting stuff happening here. I want to explore more.
I think we should. I think we should do a feature review of a Lacerda game, probably Lisboa or the Gallerist or something like that. One of his kind of, none of them are mid-weight games, but lower heavyweight games, and I think that could be really fun for us to try together.
Yeah, the one that I know Tim and I have played is On Mars, and with that one, like you said, there's a lot of little details and sub mechanisms and restrictions too. So I think in On Mars, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this thing, and now I can do this because I did this, and then this guy goes here, and oh wait, I can't do this action because I didn't meet this criteria. Rewind all that stuff. And okay, let me scratch my head a little bit. What can I do here? So that was kind of the gist of On Mars for me. I thought a lot of neat things going on. Once you figured out the whole flow and systems and the way everything combines, the game, I think, would get a lot better and open itself up a lot more. So that's kind of, it seems like Vital Lacerda's thing. You have to figure out all these things fit together just right. And then once you start seeing those combinations, then you might have some interesting gameplay there. But how long is it going to take you explore all that? I don't know. So I think that's why some people get hooked on Vitalisator. They like figuring out all these little mechanisms and how they combine and how to use your little droid to build a little green room and put your scientist over here and take this thing. So I remember it being kind of neat. The sections of, moments of On Mars were really neat, but getting to that point was tough.
I could see that from Kanban EV as well.
All right. Well, cool. I think that will wrap up this episode. If you enjoy the show, please join us on Blue Sky. Join us on our Facebook group. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.